This talk is potentially quite different than most other talks, A, that I've ever done, and B, that you may have experienced at a tech conference. For those of you that saw me last week, as gentleman here did very kindly, thank you, you've had a precursor to this, and if it helps you at all, at least he's come back for more. I mean, it could be he's a masochist, we just don't know. But it is nice to see a repeat customer, if you will. Okay, so I'm going to kick things off with a sort of a vague confession. And the confession is this: I learned something yesterday, and I had one of those embarrassing learnings. You know, those ones that we tend to put on Twitter going, things I should have known and didn't. So I learned yesterday that the Thames is called the Thames because it's called Thamesis. Has anyone heard this before? Yeah, I never knew. I went to Oxford University. The river is the Isis. I never knew why it was called the Isis, but because it's Oxford, we had to pick a different part of the word. We couldn't stick with Thames like everybody else. So Thamesis is Isis. It's why we've got ISIS in Oxford. Same river. Now, if ever you want an explanation, a story to tell about domain-driven design, now you have one. Two very different domains. Oxford, own world, own bounded context. The rest of London, very different perspective, Thames. ISIS, by the way, is a word I prefer. I mean, it reminds me of like Egyptian gods and theories. Thames reminds me of, and this is possibly letting you know my age, Thames Weekend Television, which was full of some of the best and worst programming you've ever seen. Some people are smiling, the scars are still there, the therapy's working. Okay. So yeah, things I learned. Now let's talk about learning. So that's why I bring the story about what I learned yesterday. Because what I'm going to share with you is a collection of stories. And stories are how we learn. But they're also the mechanism, by seeking certain stories, they're the mechanisms to guide us on what we want to learn. So stories are uber powerful. And so the stories I'm going to share with you today are of that nature. They are some of the most powerful stories I can share. Some of them are closely related to software engineering. Some of them are not. But the important thing to remember is that they are all stories. They are not just examples. They are the guiding factors in the things I want you to learn from this talk. Okay? Now, I have to put a warning label on this talk. I share some things in this talk that can be a little bit triggering for folks. I'm going to share with you some very difficult parts and experiences that have happened to me. If anything is triggering you, if you are feeling strong emotions, then I will take no offense at all if you have to leave the room. I say this with all seriousness. I already am anticipating the stories I will have to tell to you and how much emotion that's going to cause in me. So if it causes similar things in you, please feel you have the license to flee the room. If you want to do it loudly, even more impressive. If you want to do it swearing at me and saying I'm terrible, I also endorse these experiences as well. I learn that way. Okay, so where should we start? Let's start with a little thought experiment. Now don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to stand up or shout out any confessions of your own. I'd like you to just run a quick thought experiment for me. Totally private, totally in your own head. Try to think of two moments in your career. Two intense moments. An intensely difficult moment and an intensely good moment. And try just now to recall what was happening in those moments. What were the factors present that helped you navigate those moments? What was going on around you? What was the environment, the context like? And even more importantly, how did it feel? So once you've got that in your mind, keep it in your mind, because I want you to hold those till the end of the talk. I'm going to share some of the good and bad in my career as well. But before I go there, I want to make a guess as to what's important in those moments. The first thing I'm going to guess that wasn't important in those moments of great success and overwhelm and great difficulty and overwhelm, I bet you weren't worried about code so much. I bet you weren't worried about it being the perfect piece of software. I bet you weren't necessarily looking at Jira. Okay, you might have been looking at Jira in some of those circumstances. But I bet you weren't so worried about the tools. My theory, and what this talk is based upon, is I bet the thing that you feel the most when you recall those moments are the people you were with and how they interacted with you and what happened in that incredible, very rich experience we have called collaboration. That's what this talk is about. Now, I have to confess, I lied a little about bugs in collaboration. We've got about 10 minutes to talk about bugs in collaboration. But then we rapidly get onto the other subjects, which is, okay, how do I engineer better collaboration? What does it look like when it's working well? But we will go through the bugs first. Okay, so let's start with some of those bugs. They're easy ones to call out. So actually, let's switch it around. Anyone want to shout out a bug they think they found in collaboration when you're working with somebody? Anything you've gone, oh, that was difficult. Oh, that made it harder. Any of those? And you don't have to. I've got plenty. If there's any on your mind, anyone want to shout one out? Sorry, I didn't catch it. What was that, sorry? Not watching the slides. Not watching the slides. Or not having the slides. My problem's the latter. Yeah, so... Actually, I have another one for that. Is when someone puts up slides and all you can do is read them and you can't help it. And then you've forgotten completely what they've said. I've had that so many times. One of the reasons I don't have any is also because I'm lazy. And also because I like to connect and talk to people rather than actually have something else they're looking at. So yeah, that's a good one. Blame is an easy one. Blame's an interesting one as well. Back to those things, stories. Blame is one of those things, when someone says, you know, we want a no-blame culture, because blame is a bug in collaboration, you usually think of blaming someone else or them blaming you. In my experience, that doesn't happen as often as you think. What I detect more often in my teams is blame that is one person doing it to themselves. It's an inner blame. And I've got an example of this. Some years ago, I rode a motorcycle around the US for crazy reasons, frankly. I went to a conference. I used to drink. I drank a lot. And then someone said, what would make a conference really interesting? It would be, and I suggested pay someone to ride around the States telling everyone that the conference is interesting. And then they said yes. So I had to go and do it. And part of that, just before I left, I did a talk in Norway. And I said to the room, has anyone got an incident they want to share? A system that's failed, a system that is in crisis. And one person, I have never seen someone so excited about coming up and sharing their story. You know when someone's a little too excited? It feels like, you know, they feel like it might just have been offered amnesty and solidarity. So this gent, he put up his hand. Now, I was standing on a really tall stage, which for me, because I'm quite short, isn't a very tall stage for those of you that are tall. But for me, anything over 3 foot feels pretty tall. And I was up on this stage, and I was talking to this big old room full of people, and he ran from the back of the room all the way up and leapt on the stage. Now, I come from the Keith Richards School of Performance Art, which is when someone leaps on the stage, Keith Richards, do you want to know what Keith Richards' reaction is? It's usually to hit them with a guitar. His attitude is, I earned being here, you didn't yet. No, I don't have quite that attitude problem, but I do have this, oh my goodness, this guy is a giant, he's just jumped on my stage, I'm getting out of the way. I'm quite terrified. And he turns around to the room, and his first sentence was brilliant. His first sentence was, it was me. Now, at that point, I am concerned for his safety. Because has he misinterpreted my invite? I'm not shouldering his legal responsibilities. If he turns around to the world and said, it was me, I'm the one that destroyed the system that cost us billions of dollars in 2008, then I probably don't think he's safe to announce it. So I'm sort of looking at the room, I'm looking for his colleagues. I'm trying to see if anyone's prepared to run up and drag him back into the audience at this point. But he turns around and he said, it's me. He said, I did it. I deleted the grid computing cluster at my university by deleting one node, one command, boom, gone. What a wonderful piece of automation. So let's unpack that, because I then turned around to the room and I said, okay, what would you do? And someone was really quite funny there. Now, I don't normally get funny audiences in the Nordics, but someone turned around and said, I'd never let him touch a keyboard again. And I thought, that's fair, good answer. And so I thought I'd go with that, lean into that. I said, right, okay, what's happened here? What's at fault? What's the root cause? What's all those other buzzwords we hear that have terrible meaning? So first of all, it was me. He's blamed himself immediately. He has taken what we would call responsibility and accountability, but he's done it too far. He's declared himself the root cause, and our learning is stopped because it's his fault now. And who blamed him first? He did. That's really hard to navigate. So I basically asked him to step it back. I said, so what did you do? And this is some of my counseling training, by the way, coming to it. So I step people back through it. What did you do? And he said, well, I wrote a command. I said, can you write the command on the screen? Because I used to use laptops back then. And he's tapping away on the screen. And he wrote this command out. And I have never seen, well, no, I have. I've seen a lot of commands like this. It was the most esoteric command I'd ever seen. It was this strange mixture of what could only look like encoded text, followed by the name of the thing that was supposed to be deleted, which was also, I mean, it was code named. That was part of the giveaway. Now, if you've seen anything I've done in the past, I've written blog posts on how in software engineering we should not name things. We shouldn't be allowed to anymore. We have no track history of being successful at this. And particularly code names are a bugbear for me. If I see another cluster named after a Greek god, philosopher, or their dog, I am going to scream. And this is what he had to navigate. So he'd written this command, and it had killed this node, and there was no prompt. I said, is there any prompt after this? No, just does it. Boom. Super automated. Super efficient. Unsafe as hell. And so I said, okay, so there was nothing telling you, are you sure? I mean, I don't want Clippy, but I do want something that says, are you sure? No, there's nothing saying, are you sure? And so again, I asked the audience, where's the blame? And they said, whoa. And you could see people going, I could have done that. I would have put that command in going, that looks sound enough. And so you're starting to step it back and you're going, the system has failed the individual. And this is kind of the proof in most things, is that the system is constructed with traps. And we trap too easily. We trap with secret knowledge, the cluster name that's named after a Greek god, goddess, or anything. No prompts to say, do you know what you're doing? None. I'm not talking about the irritating ones. I'm also not talking about those error messages that come back going, you're about to do sequence code name 4565, are you sure? We all know what our response is to those. Yes. I'm not going to go read about it. So nothing helpful at that point. The system was a trap. And the trap led to immediate self-blame. So the story he was telling himself, the story he had been telling himself for some weeks, because this was happened in the past, was one of how he'd failed. He wasn't being stopped from touching a keyboard anymore. He was stopping himself because of those stories. We all have a voice in our head that's telling us stories, telling us how bad we are usually at things. The more you know, the louder that voice becomes, saying, you're no good at this. What are you doing? What are you doing on that stage, Russ? You haven't got a clue. That's the little voice there. I used to joke with some of the people I train these days. I used to joke that your brain is trying to kill you. All right? It's trying to put you in a place of complete and utter vulnerability where you don't do anything. You're scared of everything. And I said, the first thing you need to realize is the voice in your head is not you. It's just the voice in your head. It's another narrator. It's another set of stories. You don't have to listen to it. The first step for that is realizing it's not you. Okay, so blame is a bug in collaboration. The inner critic, which is that voice, is a bug in collaboration. It prevents you from adopting the qualities that I'll talk about in a minute that make collaboration so powerful, so much potential, and help you navigate those experiences like those two ones I asked you to bear in mind at the beginning of the talk. Other bugs in collaboration? Not listening. I see this all the time. I have the dubious honor of going to an awful lot of meetings. I hate meetings, but I go to a lot. And when I go into meetings, invariably I see what we call competitive conversation. I'm going to say what I want to say, and it's really important, and I'm going to talk over you because it's more important than what you're saying. No one's thinking that, by the way. It's just what they do. I work with a lovely group of people. My job at the moment is engineering manager, and I'm very fortunate. I have a very emotionally aware group of people I work with. But then I also work with the rest of the bank. And those people haven't grown up in environments where creative software solutions are the goal. They've grown up in environments where loudest voice in the room is the most confident, therefore the right one. And so you go into meetings where the exchanges can be quite difficult because no one's given a chance to finish speaking. There are no spaces in the conversation, no pauses, no gaps, because that's what productivity looks like. Speed. Blah, 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 blah. Right, we're good, let's go. We've all watched dialogue on TV, which has told us that the smartest people in the room are the ones that have the answers, that's talking the most, giving the direction, giving the ideas, witty, and they will have everything going on at once. Because on a TV show, you don't see anyone talking. You see actors delivering lines. There is no model that I've seen on TV where people are actually having a conversation. And that's so important to collaboration because the models that we have are not positive ones around how we talk to other people. And more importantly than that, how we listen to them. Now, I don't want to get too deeply into the sort of listening theory, but I'll explain in a minute why I've had to learn a lot about it. Talk about lessons I learned way too late in life. Listening. I wish I'd practiced it as a skill years ago. It's life-changing for me as well as anybody else I ever get a chance to listen to. But it changes, the reason is it changes your conversations because you understand where someone's coming from. That sounds incredibly simple. But how many times have you got incredibly frustrated with someone because they're just not listening? They're not giving you the space to say the thing you're going to say. All right, now flip it round. Imagine how many times you may have done the same thing. Because we think dialogue is bat, 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 rather than pause, think, discuss, silence, reflection, all those good things. So those are the two biggest bugs that I want to share with you this morning. But now I have the beginnings of a story around how I learned these things. And I share this story because it's the most powerful moment in my life where all of these lessons came together. Last year, in November, I was part of an incident. Now, I want to be careful around the word incident because we use it a lot. And when I say incident to somebody, they often think of systems failing, or they think of, Sev 1s where the board are on the phone call and they're moaning at you and saying, why haven't you done this, that, and the other? Oh, by the way, I'll give you some ammunition for that. Whenever anybody turns around to you and says, why didn't you know that incident was going to happen? Or why didn't you know it was going to go this way? Right. Substitute the word incident for surprise. Those sentences make no sense. Why didn't you know the surprise was going to happen? Because it was surprising. Why didn't when you prepared for the surprise? Because it's a surprise. Okay? Surprise, we should ignore incident as a word. Again, back to language in software. We should not name anything. Where they aren't incidents, because incidents makes them sound like something we could have predicted. They are surprises. Now, there are variations of surprise. There are surprises that we suspected. There are surprises we kind of knew we were getting away with. But there are also genuine, oh my goodness, that's a shock and a surprise. And that was the form of what happened to me last year. Exactly this day last year. I was going to a meeting, yet another meeting, this is where I exist. I was going to a meeting, and I was going to a meeting with an expert, you know, that sort of type of person. They sit on stage and tell you they know what they're doing. Experts. So I went to see this expert, and he turned around to me and he said, I've got some bad news about the system. So he's about to cause the incident. He's like, I've got bad news. He said, first of all, I need to do some tests on the system. So he did some tests. And those tests were rather strange. And this is where you might get an inkling of where this story is going to go. His test was to take a camera and insert it up my nose and down my throat. Didn't think you were going there, right? He went all the way down, came back out, and he said, Mr. Miles, I can't see anything. I was like, good. How can that be a bad thing? If there's nothing you can see, that's surely good news. Unless he's saying, Mr. Miles, you don't have a throat. No, he just couldn't see anything he'd been looking for, but he hadn't really told me what he was looking for because he's an expert. And don't tell you what they're looking for. They only tell you if they find something. He said, Mr. Miles, I can't see anything there, so I have some bad news. Right, hang on, my brain is just fried. Because I don't understand how you can have bad news off the back of not seeing anything. He said, bad news, we have found cancer. We found cancer in your lymph node. That lump that you came in for and had a biopsy for and we thought was a blocked salivatory gland is metastatic secondary cancer. So it's come from somewhere else. We don't know where from. He had been looking for the primary. He couldn't find it, couldn't see it in his language. Now, I don't know about you, but I rehearse for incidents. Right? I'm big on chaos engineering and game days. I help people get ready for the unexpected as best we can. So I should be really good in this situation, right? I've just hit a surprise, and I should be good at this. Well, I think we've all asked ourselves, what would we do in that moment if someone said to you, you've got cancer? And maybe some of you know. For me, I had grandiose ideas of responding with such things as, okay, I'll get through this. Or I thought I'd have thoughts of my daughter and the impact on our lives. I had profound ideas. In my head, the rehearsal had very much looked a little bit like Highlander, the movie back from the 80s, standing on a mountaintop, lightning, okay, I'm ready. That was what I thought I'd be like. What I was actually like was an entirely different experience for both me and my doctor. He asked me, quite rightly, do you have any questions? I did. Can I eat chocolate? You can imagine his response. Yes, Mr. Miles, you can still eat chocolate. So, okay, good. Can I eat ham? Yes, Mr. Miles, you can eat ham, that's still all right. Okay. He said, if you want to drink a beer, you can. I said, don't worry, I've given up that stuff, we're fine. Can I drink tea? Yes, Mr. Miles, you can drink tea. Nothing's changed from 10 minutes ago. You can still do those things. With hindsight, I know what went on there. That morning, I just bought an advent calendar, which was a chocolate advent calendar. And at no point when I bought this calendar did I think it would take part in probably the most profound moment of my life, but it did. It became the only thing I thought of. Not my daughter, not my dog, not my family, not my friends. Can I eat the chocolate that cost me all of £4.99 this morning in an advent calendar? So first lesson, humor is helpful. Because now when I look back on that moment, I look back on it with a lot of emotions. But I look back on it primarily with, oh, what a story. What an idiot. What a wally. What a great thing to have happened to me. How strange is that, right? Just for a moment, the worst news of my life, but it modified in my world into being one of the best moments, most enjoyable stories of my life. That's a perspective switch. Over the course of my career, as I've worked with people in intensely creative environments, I have been working accidentally on the skills that help me in these moments. Because I did afterwards go, is it just me? Am I just a bit weird? And admittedly, when I got to know my oncology team, and by the way, no one wants a team in healthcare. Things aren't going well if you've got a team. Mainly because they don't collaborate very well. So they tend to argue and not know what everyone else has said. But so when I spoke to my team, I would go in and I'd always bounce in to talk to them. No matter what the news was going to be, I didn't care. Because it's just going to be news. Whatever was going to happen was going to be a step along the journey. So I would go into my meetings with the maximofacial people where they were going to tell me how to exercise my jaw. This was a moment that happened to me. I've done a lot of exercises in my life. I've hated all of them. But the ones that exercise my jaw, I particularly hate because I look like a loon as I have to do them. I have to swallow. I have to move my tongue around in weird rotations. If I don't do it, my face freezes because I don't have enough blood circulation to the left-hand side of my face. I have to do that for the rest of my life. And when I heard all this from my maximofacial expert, who, by the way, records herself saying this because she's used to people falling to pieces at that point, understandably, and having to have it played back to them later on, she asked me about it, and I just couldn't stop laughing. How funny is this going to... I couldn't wait to tell my daughter, Daddy's got to pull faces for fun and profit. I've got to do it for a good reason now. And I said to her, is this normal? Do people normally... Is this shock? And she said, no, it's not normal. But she said, it is interesting, the fact that you have met this with this version of reaction. She said, it's not what you'd... She said, there is no normal, to be honest. But she said, it is slightly surprising for everyone. And at some point, I realized my whole team of medical professionals were trying to catch me out. They were waiting for me to break up. They were waiting for the tears. They were waiting for the moment when it all fell apart. And they were getting really angry because they couldn't cause it. At one point, I realized they were trying to cause it. Not in a nasty, nasty way, but they were actually saying, yeah, we can say things several ways, but we're trying this way now, just to see if we get a reaction off you where you actually open up. Because they thought it was unhealthy that I wasn't breaking up and getting upset about it. But I was explaining to them, I'm doing all that. I just have better control of my emotions than I ever realized I did. And when I say control, I don't mean control. I just notice my emotions differently. They're there, but they're like a movie reel. There's this turbulence going around, and I can notice it because I've got a small degree of separation from it. I've learnt that by being a software engineer, by knowing that my emotions aren't necessarily going to be hugely beneficial in moments of high-intensity system failure. I've learned that my emotions are just another aspect. They're the weather, the backdrop to something. How I react is my choice. That's my game. Viktor Frankl talks about this a lot. I don't know if you've read Man's Search for Meaning. There's an even better book that came before, well, after it, but before it. It's the lectures that he gave. And he points out very rightly that things happen. What they mean to you is your choice. And I chose cancer to mean I was going to learn, to mean that I was going to experience this. I'd already given up alcohol. Small confession for you. I used to be an alcoholic. I still am. As an alcoholic, you don't want to drink anymore. And I'm in a very fortunate position. It's been about 470 days now, approximately. I was going to do the maths earlier. Sorry, I didn't. But I'm very pleased to say that I no longer want to drink because I like to experience life, and alcohol reduces life. I gave up alcohol before I got cancer. And the first thing that everyone says to you when they hear your news is, God, I need a drink. Do you want a drink, Russ? No, I'm good, thanks. I'm fine. Because they want to numb the emotions. I'd learned in that small period of time between giving up alcohol and hitting cancer that my emotions are not my enemies. They're also not the best of friends. They fly past in my mind when these things happen, and I am privileged to experience them, but I want to experience them for real. I don't want to experience them through the sort of fog that alcohol delivers, which is what I used to do. So anyway, I'm not one of those annoying ex-drinkers that says you mustn't drink. I still enjoy watching everyone else get drunk. It's great fun. There is a point in the evening where no longer do I find the jokes funny. That's just me. It's because I still have a brain working. So I have to leave at those points because it's not funny anymore. I'm going to go. Okay. So where are we in this, right? So let's track it back to what were the properties that got me through this incident? They're the same properties that when I ran that thought experiment that I asked you to do a minute ago, when I tracked back to what are the best moments in my career and the hardest, the same things came to my mind. The connections and the collaboration I had with people were what mattered. What I owned didn't matter. The code I'd written didn't matter. The systems I used didn't matter. The people I was working with were everything, and their relationships to me. And so I had one of those annoying, I think there's a talk about epiphanies going on at the moment. I had one of those epiphanies where I was like, damn it. I spent my life trying to accrue things, and then I didn't need the things anymore. I sold everything I owned. Not because I'm a minimalist, although technically I could look like one, but I have a lot of books, so I'm not really. And I'm accruing a lot of books, so I'm really not really. But I had to sell everything I owned because the first leaflet you get when you get cancer is, got financial problems? No, but I might have. So I sold everything. I sold my house, I sold my bike, my motorbike, my Harley. Just to let you know the attention, the power of selling that. That was not easy. I sold my motorcycle, my baby. No, I didn't sell my baby, that'd be awful. I sold my motorbike, which was my baby. I sold my car, I sold everything. Reduced my life down to zero. Except they couldn't go to zero because the people I worked with were still there. My job was still there. Being engineering manager was still there. Okay, so having said that software engineers shouldn't name anything, I named something. And I think it's fair to say I continue the long-held tradition that naming things in this industry is a terrible idea. I came up with an acronym to help me remember what I call the modulators of collaboration. These are the things that I think are important to collaborate. And so what I do with modulators, if you're not familiar with complexity theory, is in a complex system, like a socio-technical system, which is what you inhabit when you're working on software, you can't go in with grafted best practices. You can't say, we should do X and we will be better. Because you know what happens? The organism rejects it. It doesn't stick. It's not a pattern. And because it's been brought in the wrong way, it will just be rejected. So what the modulators do is they give me a test, a set of signals that tell me whether I am collaborating well and whether I am fostering an environment that collaboration can emerge, because it's a complex system. And those modulators are this acronym, which is terrible. The acronym is GRAPE. Yes, you heard it here first. It's GRAPE TM. No, it's not TM. GRAPE. Grit, residuality, anti-fragility, psychological safety, and empathy, and compassion. But that doesn't spell a word, so it's in there, sort of hidden under empathy. These 5 things are my steers. They are the things I look for, and I'll tell you how I look for them in a minute. They are the ones that steer me towards the skills I want to learn as a great collaborator in great software engineering teams. They are things as a manager I look for and foster as a great engineering manager. Because we work in a highly collaborative, intense environment, these are the 5 that I've chosen. Now, your context can be different. You can choose a different acronym. This is the beauty of GRAPE, is it's self-referentially destructive. You can go and create your own. But these were the 5 that I distilled from my career that mattered to me in this moment. Grit, I learned, thank you very much. That was the 10 minutes to go signal, by the way, your star. Grit, I learned from a lady called Catherine years ago. She did a talk on grit. I like to think of strength. It's the strength to carry on. It's the strength to have the humor. It's the strength to learn. It's just strength. It's not necessarily physical strength, because I lost 1/3 of my body weight in chemotherapy and radiotherapy. I didn't have much physical strength anymore, but I had a lot of grit. So grit was something I looked for. Residuality is a strong relationship to resilience. Residuality asks the question, what survives? What matters? What is left after the turbulence, after the difficulty? What's left is what matters. And then you try and maximize, through residuality, you try and maximize the important parts of the system that are retained. I realized I didn't need things anymore, but I needed the human connections that I thought weren't that big a deal before. Anti-fragility, if you haven't encountered it, I recommend you go and look into it. It's written by, can I be nice here and say, a rather obnoxious economist? However, it's a nice concept, and that's because we're storytelling beasts. It gives us another way of telling stories. Anti-fragility says in a stressful environment, how will you thrive? Not just how will you survive, but how will you thrive from it? That was one of my modulators. Psychological safety gets a lot of press at the moment. Lots of great ideas out there on what it looks like and feels like. I have a really simple example of what that feels like. In the middle of my cancer sojourn, my little journey with this beast, I was asked to make a plan. The plan was I was going to have chemoradiotherapy for 6 weeks. Now, I don't know if anyone's had chemotherapy, but it's like going to the world's worst airline lounge. No one there is flying anywhere they want to go, and everyone is in variations of distress. It's horrid. It's like your United Airlines. No, it's unfair. It's like it's like an airline lounge by an airline that shall remain nameless. We've all probably been there. You can also think about just about any waiting room is what it's like. The difference is you've got these vaguely wipe clean, always be wary of wipe clean furniture. Wipe clean furniture that is sort of like loungeable in. Because you're going to be there 4 or 5 hours whilst they pump these toxins into you. So I was building a plan about how I would continue working whilst going through chemoradiotherapy. And so I came up with a plan. I said, I am going to do my chemotherapy on Mondays all day. Can't do anything about it. I have radiotherapy every single day of the week. But that's only about 15, 20 minutes. So I'll go and do that. It's over in Brighton. It's about 40 minutes away, 40 minutes back. I reckon I'll be around for most of the day. My team showed me what psychological safety was. First of all, they said, Russ, you're an idiot. What are you thinking? I said, plan A is I'll be here and I'll have these treatments, and plan B is I might not be here much. And they said, no. Plan A, you're not here. Plan B, if we see you here, A, we want a good reason, and B, we'll just be grateful that you can pop your head in the door, virtual door, because we're on Slack. I got a lesson in what psychological safety was. I could bring my whole person to it. There are times when I dialed into Zoom meetings where they didn't recognize me because I looked shocking. They didn't recognize me either. I have never lost so much weight in my life. After spending years wanting to lose weight, you have this horrible experience of losing weight and then looking really good. There's like a couple of days in the middle, you look fabulous. And then you just fly past it down into skeletal. And they reacted. I needed it. I was on calls and they would turn around and go, my goodness, Russ, you look terrible. How are you feeling? I was like, yeah, I am. There was no pretense. There was no, Russ is fine. It was so beautiful to see these people connect with me in that way. I had one of those moments in my darkest, hardest times at work where I realized that it was the connections with people that mattered. So there's your psychological safety. Then there's empathy, and I'm going to have to race through this because we're getting close to the end of time. Empathy was taught to me by two things. A lady called Julie and work I decided to do in the middle of my treatments. So I was bored during my treatments. I'm a big reader, and I took a lot of morphine with the pain, and that made my eyes not work. So I couldn't read very well. So I decided, what could I do with my life? I could find an organization to volunteer at and go and do some extra training is what I could do. Yes, I hadn't learnt my lesson. I hadn't learnt my lesson about recovering and relaxing. It just wasn't easily something I could grasp. But in order to decide to do this, I needed a push. And so I was going to the chemotherapy ward on my Mondays, my lounge from hell, and I watched a lady there, reasonably sort of, I guess early 50s. I'm going to say early 50s because she'd like that. I think it was probably later, but early 50s. And she caught my eye because most people in the chemo lounge are quite understandably not happy. And she kept chuckling. Because what she was doing is, you're hooked up to these machines. To go to the bathroom, you've got to walk with the machine. The machine goes everywhere you go. And so it's on these horrible little wheels, like a shopping trolley. That means it's doing that all the time. She's trying to guide it. And so everyone's going to the bathroom, and she's sitting opposite the bathroom, and she's kicking wires across the floor. Because then everyone's walking past going, boom, boom, as they're going in, and she's cracking up. And I thought, how cruel. How nasty. And so I sat down. I took the seat next to her one Monday, and I said, hi, I'm Russ. You seem to be the devil. What's going on here? I love it, but how are you not getting hit more? And she said, first of all, no one hits someone with no hair. I was like, fair point. She had on one of the cold caps. I don't know if you're familiar with the cold caps. They're kind of like, if you could take chemotherapy, which is nasty, and make it tortuous, that's what they do. What they do is they reduce the blood flow and temperature around your scalp so that you get a 50% chance of retaining your hair. Julie was using cold caps, so she was in agony for 5 or 6 hours of that day, blistering headaches. So to distract herself, she was kicking these wires across the floor and seeing how many people she could make stumble with the machine, which was evil, but I can see her point. The important part of this is I learned this from her because I asked her what was going on in her world. Rather than just judging her as being evil or nasty or malicious, I was like, why are you doing that? You know, you could have an iPad open and be watching a movie. What the hell's going on here? I spoke to her about whether I should join this organization, and she said she thought I should. And so I did. And I'm glad I did, because it taught me empathy and listening and how powerful those things are. If you can learn one skill, learn listening. Now, I learned it by joining an organization called the Samaritans. The Samaritans are easily, actually someone asked me recently, why did you join? And I said, because there's only one thing in my life I found that I could do that was just good. It wasn't making rich people rich. It wasn't, it wasn't making a dent in the universe. It was helping people, and that was all it was doing. And so I sit for about 5 hours a week on a phone, and I listen to strangers tell me what's going on in their life. And I've been taught over many, many weeks of training how to listen to them, how to understand them, how to empathize, how to be curious. And I thought I'd be terrible at this, by the way, until I spoke to Julie, who turned around and asked me, so what do you think you do for a living, Russ? I said, I'm an engineering manager. I help the team be performant, and I help them do this. And she said, that's all crap. She said, every time you've spoken to me, you've told me about how lovely the people are and what they want to do next and how they want to grow and how they want to thrive and what they're going to do and how you're going to try and get them to do talks and how you're going to try and introduce them to other authors and stuff. She said, you don't care about any of those other things. You know your people. That's what you're good at. So go be a Samaritan. Go give it a go. And I'm so glad I did. It's the best part of my week, apart from speaking to you lovely people, by far. So if you're interested in doing it, reach out. I'll happily introduce you to the system. You will never regret it. Okay, so I have to end the story now. I must be getting to, am I getting that signal yet? Are we getting close to that? Yeah, okay, cool. Right, so, by the way, that signal, not good at the end of the Samaritans part of the sequence. But okay, let's close it out now. back to those stories I asked you to think about at the beginning. So these modulators, the way to think about them, the way to think about GRAPE, is how many stories in your life do you experience that you can map to those modulators? Think about the stories you want there to be and the stories that you want there to be less of in relation to those modulators. That's how I steer my world. I want more stories about grit, residuality, resiliency, anti-fragility, psychological safety, empathy, compassion. I want those stories. And that is my compass on a daily basis as an engineering manager and as a software engineer trying to collaborate. How do I make that happen? More stories of that kind, where I can say those properties look like they're in those stories. That's what helps me change my behavior. I have two endings to this story. I have a sad ending and a happier ending. Actually, they're both happy endings. The first one is that the downside of joining the Cancer Club is not that you can't talk about Cancer Club, because you should. It's that people leave Cancer Club for two reasons. They get better or they don't get better. Julie had already been through 6 sessions of chemotherapy, 6 cycles. And this was her last shot. And she chose not to do any more. She passed away just over a couple of months ago. The last thing she told me, and it sounds very profound, but if I explain to you that Julie had a really wicked sense of humor, it wasn't as profound as it's going to sound. She turned around to me, the last thing we actually talked about, and I talked about the Samaritans work I was doing, and she said, it's really great, I'm going to tell you a quote from Maya Angelou. And she said, by the way, it's not what Maya Angelou said. It's one of those beautiful misquotes. Like most of the great quotes we hear about in memes online, is they're probably not said by the person that says that they were said, that they ever said them. But she said, it's by Maya Angelou. And she told me this. And it's actually on the wall of the duty room in my Samaritans center, which made me smile. It's, people don't remember what you do. They don't remember what you say. They really remember how they made you feel, how you made them feel. So back to your stories. You remember those moments from back in the day when it was good and bad because of how they made you feel. Figure out what your modulators are. What's your GRAPE? And start building more stories in your world to support your modulators. You don't need grandiose values. You don't need grandiose principles. You just need to know what matters and how you want more of those stories. And you'll become a greater collaborator, particularly if you pick up on empathy and listening. These are the superpowers of the game. The happier ending to this story is that I'm very fortunate I got my cancer-free diagnosis 3 months ago as well. So it's a small plus on a very difficult year, but one I'm taking. I'm very grateful that I've gone through this incident. I'm grateful it's reminded me what matters, and I'm really grateful to be here today to take 45 minutes of your life to share it with you. I hope what I said is interesting. If it has triggered you, I apologize, and I would like you to come and talk to me about it afterwards if you'd like to. Also, stay in touch. As people who have to work in a highly intense, collaborative environment, these are the skills that you're going to develop. And I'd love to help you or support you or learn from you as you do it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.